What if I told you that Blake Lively's latest courtroom move could be the biggest gamble of her career? A desperate play filled with redacted witnesses, shocking accusations, and explosive claims meant not for justice but for headlines. This story is not about one motion or one case. It is about a pattern of power, plays a war of narratives, and a star whose fight in court may finally expose more about her than the man she is targeting. Welcome to Starscope, where tonight we peel back the curtain on the most dramatic twist yet in the battle between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni. Blake Lively filed a document in court demanding punitive damages, trouble damages, and millions of dollars from Justin Baldoni. And this was not the first time. It was the third attempt to extract money or silence through sanctions, and behind her stood Leslie Sloan with 2 motions, and her husband with another, stacking up 6 desperate shots at trying to make Wayfair bleed money and reputation. But this time the move looked more like a calculated PR stunt than a legal strategy, because buried inside her 30-page rambling document filled with arguments already admonished by the judge was the introduction of a shadowy anonymous figure claiming negative encounters with Baldoni, painting him as intolerable and volatile. A man excluded from sets and marketing. Like it was routine, yet no details, no names, nothing but a redacted declaration designed to smear and nothing more. It reeked of weakness, of a case crumbling under the weight of its own contradictions. Because why would anyone introduce triple hearsay from a nameless witness about a conversation allegedly had by Steve Sarowitz, when hearsay was mocked and dismissed earlier by this very team? And yet Lively's attorneys took that fragile rumor and spun it into an ominous tale of billionaires pledging $100 million to destroy her life. A tale meant to terrify, meant to stir public anger, meant to cast her as the fragile target of unstoppable forces. And yet even here the truth twisted. Sarowitz never threatened her safety. He vowed to defend his studio like a fortress, to protect it at any cost and in court. That is not retaliation, that is self-defense, but Lively wants the world to see retaliation everywhere, to believe that lawsuits are conspiracies and defenses are weapons of war. She insists the Wayfair parties planned to retaliate against her before and during litigation, even though filing a lawsuit is the very definition of a legal right, not a vendetta. She insists that vague words about dead bodies prove she is in mortal danger, when even the statement itself clarifies not dead, but dead to me, meaning ruined reputationally, not physically. Harmed, but to her narrative, every line must be bent, every shadow stretched until it becomes monstrous. So she drags this into the spotlight, leaking it to TMZ, making sure the world hears about an unnamed person, redacted allegations, and a billionaire. Villain because the court may not buy it, but the public might. And in that arena, headlines can do what evidence cannot. But the cracks are everywhere. The judge has already dismissed the Sarowitz quote as not an overt act. No evidence of conspiracy. Only words spoken at a premiere with no action behind them. And yet Lively recycles it again, trying to reframe it this time as proof of retaliation through the lawsuit itself, changing her claim from smear campaigns to digital conspiracies to now the simple act of countersuing, but it exposes the hollow core of her fight. Because if her case was strong, if the facts were on her side, she would not need anonymous witnesses, hearsay, or leaked exclusives. She would not need TMZ. She would not need to turn a legal defense into an imagined crime. Yet she does again and again, hammering away publicly, trying to drown Baldoni and Wayfair in the court of opinion. While in the court of law, her arguments crumble piece by piece, and as the smoke thickens around this battle, it becomes impossible to ignore the desperate rhythm of Blake Lively's moves, because each new filing feels less like a pursuit of justice and more like a hunt for headlines. Her latest document was not about truth or law. It was about theater, about shaping a story so dramatic that the public would forget the absence of substance. She introduced this shadow figure, this unnamed, faceless declarant claiming to have suffered verbal abuse at the hands of Justin Baldoni. A claim so redacted, so hollow that it said nothing at all yet. In the public imagination once whispered through TMZ, it became a bombshell headline. Blake Lively brings forward a new witness. Baldoni accused again, the audience gasps, the narrative twists. And suddenly Baldoni is cast as a monster. But inside the courtroom, the declaration is a ghost. It carries no legal weight, because federal courts reject propensity evidence. The idea that someone is guilty now simply because they might have behaved badly before is forbidden. It poisons justice. And yet that was the exact purpose of Lively's move, to poison not the court, but the audience outside the court, to turn this fight into a spectacle that thrives not on evidence, but on anger and suspicion, and the deeper one digs, the more it reeks of weakness. Because if Lively truly had proof of retaliation, if she truly had a strong claim, she would not need to recycle the same lines about Sarowitz and his $100 million vow. To defend his studio, she would not need to frame that vow as an ominous threat when the judge himself has already ruled it carried no weight. She would not need to pretend that lawsuits themselves are retaliation, when in reality they are the most basic form of legal self-defense. Yet that is the path she walks, constantly reframing, constantly reshaping her accusations first. It was a clandestine smear campaign, then it was the coordinated attack of 100 creators, then it became a conspiracy to retaliate, and now it is simply the existence of countersuits themselves. Each shift in narrative exposes the fragility of her case. Each pivot shows a woman scrambling to keep the spotlight burning no matter how flimsy the script, and as she performs this theater, she leans on the power of fear. Fear of anonymous voices, fear of billionaires, fear of secret plots. She amplifies it by whispering it into the eager ears of TMZ, by ensuring that every redacted sentence becomes a headline. Every allegation, no matter how thin, becomes fuel for speculation. She thrives on the idea that the court of public opinion is easier to sway than the court of law, and in that strategy, she may be right. Because the public does not demand evidence, the public only needs a headline. The public only needs to believe that where there is smoke, there must be fire. But in this courtroom battle, the smoke is manufactured. It is pumped into the air by PR teams, by carefully crafted leaks, by motions stuffed with drama but empty of proof. And the irony is suffocating because Lively accuses Brian Friedman and the Wayfair parties of trying to sway jurors of tampering with opinion. Yet it is she who leaks to TMZ. It is she who parades redacted declarations. It is she who seeks to turn rumor into fact by amplifying it in the media. The hypocrisy drips from every page. And as the judge reviews these filings, it becomes clear that this is not law. It is performance, it is spectacle, and spectacle is not justice. And in the shadows, Justin Baldoni remains quiet. Wayfair remains silent. Their strategy speaks volumes, because in silence there is strength while Lively drowns herself in noise. In silence, the case unfolds on facts while Lively flails with stories in silence. Their side reveals confidence while her side reveals desperation. And the more she talks, the more the cracks widen, the more she leaks. The more the weakness shows until even her supporters begin to ask why, if her case was truly so strong, does she need all of this theater? Why, if her truth was undeniable, does she need anonymous ghosts and tabloid exclusives? Why, if justice was on her side, does she not let the evidence speak for itself? But that is the tragic flaw of this saga. It is not about justice. It is about control. Control of the narrative. Control of the headlines, control of how the world sees her and how the world sees Baldoni. And in that hunger for control, she risks everything. Because the court of law is not swayed by performance, the judge does not care about TMZ, the jury cannot hear redacted ghosts, and at the end of the day, the law demands proof. Not performance, and proof is what she lacks. And yet she marches forward, dragging new names, new shadows, new conspiracies into the light, each one weaker than the last, each one exposing her desperation. And this is why the story is so gripping, because it is not just a lawsuit. It is a war of perception, a battle between silence and noise, between fact and theater, between a strategy of defense and a strategy of destruction. And in this war, the question burns, who will the public believe, who will the court trust, and how much longer can Blake Lively keep building castles out of smoke before the wind of truth sweeps them away because the cracks are widening and the collapse feels inevitable? Yet the performance goes on louder, more desperate, more shocking with every move. Because in the theater of scandal, the show must never stop, even if the truth has long since left the stage. The storm only deepens as we move into the next chapter of this legal drama. Because Blake Lively's filings have begun to resemble less a pursuit of truth and more a desperate stage play, where the props are redacted declarations, the actors are unnamed shadows, and the plot twists are fed directly into the bloodstream of tabloids like TMZ. And yet within this spectacle, there lies a devastating contradiction, for Lively insists she is the victim of retaliation. Yet each step she takes reeks of retaliation itself. Each motion is designed to smear Justin Baldoni, each leak crafted to darken his image, each whisper strategically placed to ensure that the public consumes a narrative before a judge can ever weigh the evidence she knows. The court of law is her battlefield, but she also knows it is the battlefield where her position is weakest, and so she shifts the fight to a theater. She can control the arena of public opinion where facts are less important than feelings, and where perception can masquerade as reality. But here lies the danger, for in chasing control of the narrative, she has surrendered control of her credibility, because every new declaration, every recycled claim, every dramatic twist makes her look less like a victim and more like a manipulator, orchestrating chaos in the hopes that the noise itself will drown out the silence of proof. Her entire case has now become a game of smoke and mirrors. She leans on Sarah Witz's supposed $100 million vow, repeating it as though it were the gospel of retaliation, even though the judge himself struck it down as irrelevant and immaterial. She clings to anonymous declarations whispering about past verbal abuse, even though such evidence is forbidden in court because it speaks not to retaliation but to character assassination. She leaks these whispers to TMZ, where headlines thrive not on accuracy but on shock and spectacle. And in doing so, she betrays her own strategy, because if she had evidence of retaliation, she would not need to lean on old quotes. She would not need to lean on forbidden declarations. She would not need to leak to tabloids. She would simply present her case in silence with strength and let the facts devastate her opponents. But the absence of facts is her great weakness, and so she replaces them with theater. Yet theater has a cost, and the cost is that every move exposes her desperation. Every pivot reveals that her case is not built on a foundation of truth, but on scaffolding of spectacle, and that scaffolding cannot hold forever. Eventually, it will collapse, and when it does, it will not only destroy her case, it will destroy her credibility. Because the court of law punishes those who abuse its process, and right now, Lively stands dangerously close to that edge. Her opponents have remained remarkably disciplined, silent, measured, allowing her to exhaust herself in noise while they prepare to strike with facts. The silence of Baldoni and the Wayfair. Parties is not weakness, it is strategy. It is confidence. It is a signal that they do not fear her claims because the truth is on their side, and in that silence they allow Lively to reveal her own hand, to expose her reliance on drama, to showcase her desperation. And while she continues to hurl accusations, her opponents build their foundation, brick by brick, fact by fact, until when the time comes, their wall of evidence will crush the flimsy theater she has tried so desperately to stage. This is the devastating paradox of her fight. The louder she shouts, the weaker she looks, the more she leaks, the more hollow her case becomes. The more she attacks, the more the court sees a woman who has lost control, not just of the facts, but of herself, and yet she persists, because in her mind, this battle is no longer about law. It is about survival. She cannot retreat, because retreat would mean humiliation. She cannot admit weakness, because weakness would mean defeat. And so she doubles. Down she drags new shadows into the spotlight. She spins new conspiracies, she reframes old arguments into new costumes, and every time the judge dismisses one of her claims, she repackages it and sells it again to the public as though it were new, as though it were proof, as though repetition itself could transform fiction into fact. But courts are not theaters. Repetition does not create evidence. Drama does not create proof, and whispers do not create truth. And the more she leans on these tactics, the more the judge sees through her strategy, the more jurors will recognize the absence of substance, and the more the public will begin to question why she insists on fighting this war in the media instead of the courtroom. Because the answer is simple. The courtroom is where she loses. The courtroom is where facts reign. The courtroom is where performance is stripped bare, and justice demands more than whispers. Justice demands evidence, and yet that is the very thing she lacks. So she fights instead, in the shadows of tabloids, in the glow of cameras, in the chaos of speculation. And this is why her position is perilous, because the spectacle may sustain her for a time. It may give her headlines. It may keep her in the conversation. It may even turn some of the public against Baldoni, but it cannot save her in the end, because the law does not bend to performance. And eventually this case will not be decided by TMZ. It will be decided by a judge and possibly a jury, and when that moment comes, no amount of whispers, no amount of shadows, no amount of repetition will suffice. Only evidence will matter. And when the evidence is weak, the collapse is inevitable, and yet she persists. She risks not just her case, but her career, her reputation, and perhaps even her freedom. Because if the court sees her actions as abusive, as manipulative, as designed to smear, rather than seek justice, the consequences could be devastating. She risks sanctions. She risks dismissal. She risks the humiliation of being exposed as a performer rather than a plaintiff. And most chilling of all, she risks the possibility of facing legal consequences far beyond the courtroom battles she thought she could control. This is the danger of spectacle. It feeds on itself. It demands escalation. It demands louder accusations, bigger headlines, more shocking claims. And once you begin feeding it, you cannot stop, because stopping means the spotlight fades. And for Lively, that is the one outcome she cannot accept, so she escalates, she pushes further. She risks more until she finds herself on the edge of a cliff, with no way back and only one way forward. And that way forward leads to collapse, to the possibility of ruin, to the nightmare of becoming the villain in the story she tried so desperately to script. This is where the suspense lies, because the question is no longer whether her tactics will backfire. It is when and how spectacularly, and the world watches. Not because they believe in her claims, but because they are captivated by the theater, because the show she has built is gripping, dramatic, filled with shadows and whispers and leaks. But the audience knows, as all audiences do, that theater is not reality. And eventually, the curtain falls, and when it does, there is nothing left but the truth. And the truth is what she fears most, because it is the one thing she cannot control. And so she delays it. She distracts from it. She drowns it in noise. But no matter how loud the war, noise becomes the silence of evidence will eventually cut through, and when it does, the spectacle will end. The truth will rise, and Blake Lively will face the consequences of choosing theater over justice. And so we arrive at the final chilling reality that Blake Lively, in her desperate pursuit of control, has constructed a fragile empire built not on facts, but on fear, not on justice, but on performance. And while the spectacle has kept cameras flashing and headlines spinning, it has also drawn the scrutiny of the very system she hoped to manipulate the courts. See through her leaks, the public begins to question her motives, and even her allies grow cautious of standing too close to a storm that may soon consume itself. The truth is relentless. It waits patiently beneath the noise. It cannot be delayed forever. And when the curtain finally falls, there will be no more shadows, no more whispers, no more carefully staged leaks. There will only be evidence and judgment, and if that evidence does not support her claims, then the consequences could be devastating. She risks not only losing this battle, but rewriting her legacy from beloved star to cautionary tale of hubris and manipulation. The question is no longer whether her tactics will collapse, but how far the collapse will reach. Will it end her case? Will it fracture her career? Will it drag her reputation into ruins? Or will it ignite something even darker, legal consequences that extend beyond embarrassment into lasting damage? The suspense lies not in whether the truth exists, but in when it will finally cut through the noise. And when it does, the show ends, the spotlight fades, and only reality remains. And in that moment, Blake Lively will no longer be able to script her narrative. The truth will write its own ending, and the world will be watching